All right. Well, again, thank you guys so much for joining us tonight at New City Church. Whether New City's your home, maybe you're visiting from out of town with family, or you're checking us out for the first time. Again, thank you for making us some of your Christmas season. Speaking of Christmas presents, I want to start with a story. When I was a kid, every year we would drive to Statesville, North Carolina. I grew up in Cary, and it was about a 2-hour drive. We would go to my grandparents for stay there for a couple days. And typically, me and my brothers would go a couple days ahead of time. But for and then my mom was on staff. My dad was an elder at the church that I grew up in, and so they would do their Christmas Eve services, and then they would come. For whatever reason, this year we were going with them all at the same time, and it was Christmas Eve morning. We were driving to Statesville, and so it's Christmas Eve. You know, there's more traffic, and about halfway there, my dad was driving, and he hits the steering wheel. He says, "Oh shoot, I forgot to pack the presents." And you know, you're sitting in the back seat, and I'm like, that is a problem, right? And my dad, if you knew him, is very pragmatic, and he said, "Well, it's not a big deal. They'll just open them when we come back home after Christmas." And of course, my mom was like, "No, that's not what you're going to do for Christmas. You have to get the gifts." And so we turned around, and what was supposed to be a 2-hour trip ended up taking to be a 5-hour trip. And as frustrating as that was, we got our presents, because if you're a kid, it kind of is like the big thing that you're excited about. And so I share that story because, again, for me as a kid trying to get these presents, maybe for some of your childhood, and we think, man, what is Christmas going to offer for me? Like, what am I going to get this year? And that's the thing that you might be excited about. What I want to do this evening is I just want to take a few minutes. Instead of talking about presents, I want to talk about Jesus as we look at this question. What does Jesus offer? What is it that makes Jesus worthy of spending some of your holiday season here and praising him maybe throughout the year, or maybe even your curiosity? Like, what is this all about? What does Jesus actually offer to us? That's what I want to spend a few minutes looking at this evening. And so if you have a Bible, will you turn with me to John chapter 4? John chapter 4. If not, there's a black one in front of you. It'll be on page 944. Or if you do not own a Bible, we'd encourage you to take one of those black ones home. It is our gift to you. But if you'd like to read along with us, John chapter 4. Now, what I want to do real quickly, I'm not going to read all of these verses, but we're going to read some and summarize some. We're going to look at it, perhaps for some of you, a well-known story to see what is actually going on there and what it shows us about why Jesus came and what he offers to us. Now, John chapter 4, there's a story of Jesus who encounters a Samaritan woman at a well in the middle of the day. Now, it is helpful for us to understand as we read this. I just want to track with me just for 1 minute so I can explain some things to you. It is helpful for us to understand in the ancient world, first century Rome, Jews and Samaritans hated each other. They did not like each other. If you were to put modern language on it, they would view each other with racist and dehumanizing views. Now, if you're curious as to why, it's because when the Israelites first came into the Promised Land and created a nation, they eventually split. In the year of 722 BC, the kingdom of Israel split into two kingdoms, and you had the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom was then captured by the Assyrians, which is a growing empire. And when they were captured, many of the Israelites were kind of deported out of Assyria, and then many Assyrians came to live into the land. Those Israelites who remained in the northern kingdom then intermarried with the various Assyrians that took over the land, began to live many of their lifestyles, adopt some of their religious practices. And so after the Jewish exile was over, and then many of the Israelites moved back into the northern kingdom, many of the Jews lived in what was known as the southern kingdom, looked at the Samaritans as political rebels. So Jerusalem was in the southern kingdom. Samaria ended up becoming the capital of the northern kingdom, where they would kind of build their own worship sites. They would use, if you read the documents, again, if you translate it into modern language, they would refer to each other as like half-breeds, like the Jews to the Samaritans, because you're like half Samaritan, half Assyrian. You kind of have changed the religious practices, and you've kind of incorporated some of their pagan practices into their worship of Yahweh. And so they viewed them as unacceptable people. And so the Jews and the Samaritans, they hated each other with racist vitriol. And we here see a story where Jesus is traveling through Samaria. He's meeting a woman at the well, and he's going to have a conversation with her. So he's a Jewish man, a Samaritan woman, very opposites. They wouldn't typically talk to each other in public. And they have this conversation. We'll pick up the story in verse 7. It says this of John chapter 4. A woman of Samaria came to draw water. "Give me a drink," Jesus said to her, because his disciples had gone into town to buy food. So it's important to note that it's in the middle of the day here. The first couple of verses tells us this. This woman comes to draw water from the well in the middle of the day, and she is by herself. Now, typically, women would go to the well to draw water in groups, and they would come either early in the morning or in the evening when it wasn't so hot. The fact that this woman comes in the middle of the day by herself shows us that she is someone who kind of feels like a social outcast. She doesn't have friends. She feels public shame, and so she's coming when she doesn't have to be with other people from her town. Now, Jesus is at the well. His disciples have since left to go into town to buy food, and Jesus is hanging out at the well, and he engages this Samaritan woman in a conversation. Now, it's important to note, this is not a customary thing. Jewish men, Samaritan women would not have talked to each other publicly. Now, again, this isn't like a moral issue or an ethical issue. It's just culturally, this is not something you would expect Jesus to do, and yet he starts to talk to her. He asks her to give her a drink from the well, and here's her response in verse 9. She says this, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink from me, a Samaritan woman?" Remember, we're supposed to hate each other. You're not supposed to like me. She asked him, "For Jews do not associate with Samaritans." Verse 10, Jesus answered, "If you knew the gift of God and who was saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would ask him and he would give you living water." Right, so Jesus here, again, he's breaking a social and a religious taboo. He's speaking with a Samaritan woman, and he's asking her to give him a drink from her own devices. Again, many Jews, first of all, they wouldn't talk to Samaritans, and they assumed that even the utensils that Samaritans used were unclean. So her cup, her bowl, whatever she would use to take out of the water from the well would also be unclean. Yet, if you've been with us, we've been the last couple of weeks, we've been in the Gospel of John, and John chapter 2, Jesus' first miracle of turning water into wine, one of the things that we see happening in that miracle is that everything Jesus touches, he purifies. This is why he can touch lepers and those who are ritually impure, and instead of him becoming impure, he makes them pure. So he can take things that even people think are impure or defiled, and he can make them clean. He makes unclean things clean. And so he asks her to draw water and to drink from her jugs. Now, of course, she can't believe that he's asking her for a drink. And then he responds to her by saying, "Well, if you knew who I really was, it would actually be you asking me for a drink." Now, again, this statement is actually a quite loaded statement. If you read the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, you see time and again that God supplies living water. In fact, there are various times in the prophets where it talks about that there's this idea that living water will flow out of Jerusalem. That you see this in the book of Zechariah or the book of Ezekiel, that something's going to happen in Jerusalem that's going to give this ritual, this purification water to all peoples. And so if we're looking this evening at this question is, what does Jesus offer? One of the things that we see in this conversation with the Samaritan woman is this, that Jesus offers living water to those who don't ask for it. He offers something to people that they don't even ask for, even if they desperately need it. So we're going to see here in a second, they're going to go back and forth, and she's going to be kind of confused. What do you mean, this water? Why would I ask it for you? And so he's offering her something, though, that if she knew what it was, she would want it, but she doesn't even know she needs it, and yet he wants to supply her with it. Again, this makes me think of Christmas presents. I don't know if this is what it was like for you, especially when you were a kid growing up. My parents were really good at buying gifts. And when I say my parents, I mean my mom, because my dad was. Here's what it was like in our household. Here's probably what it was like you, husbands, if you're married. I've got a meme I want you to see. On the left, it says, every mom watching you open Christmas presents. On the right, it says, every dad just as surprised as you. So that was my household growing up, and it's even my household now. Christina buys a present. I'm like, yeah, that's awesome. I was so excited for you to see that. This reminds me, when I was a kid, so we do our Christmas list, and this was the year that Razor scooters come out, okay? If you're my age, you remember them. If you're my parents' age, you remember buying them. They were the ultimate ankle breakers. They were the thing everybody wanted. That year they came out, I didn't ask for one. And it was a couple of days before Christmas, after talking to all my friends, and everyone's talking about this Razor scooter and how they asked for a Razor scooter, and they can't wait to get a Razor scooter. And my older brother, Jordan, had asked for a Razor scooter, but I didn't. So it was like December 23rd, whatever. It's probably the year we forgot our presents. So I'm like, yeah, we probably should leave those at home. And I remember being just like really disappointed, right? right? Like, I'm not going to get this Razor scooter. All my friends are going to get this Razor scooter. And so I don't know, again, what it's like for you and your household. For us, when we open presents on Christmas morning, it is one at a time. By the way, it's what you should do, so it takes more than like 10 seconds. And so we do the one at a time thing. Here it goes, one at a time. And then we got to probably the last gift, and it was something that me and my brother, we had our own, but we had to open it together. And won't he do it? Guess what your boy got? A Razor scooter, right? I didn't ask for it, hear me, but I wanted it, and I got it. What we are going to see in this story is Jesus is going to offer something to this woman, even to us, that even if we didn't ask for it or realize we needed it, he still wants to give it to us. So he offers this living water to people who do not even ask for it. And so again, he tells this woman, if you knew who I was, you would actually ask me for a drink. And then she responds and she's confused, right? She's like, well, how can you offer me water if you don't even have something to get water from the well from? You don't even have a bucket. And then she's like, are you saying you're greater than Jacob? She seems to be picking up on, well, maybe he's referring to something else. I'm not sure. And so are you greater than Jacob, who is the father of the Israelites, who, by the way, actually built the well that they're standing at? Like, she's confused. Real water? Are you like someone who's like talking about something different? And then she says this in verse 13. This is Jesus' response, verse 13. Jesus said, everyone who drinks from this water, he's talking about the well, will get thirsty again. But whoever drinks from the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. In fact, the water I will give him will become a well of water springing up in him for eternal life. Sir, the woman said to him, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and come here to draw water. So she's still kind of confused. She's like, I want this water. I don't have to come here ever again. Like, I don't have to come here by myself in the heat. Like, I can like stay home. It's like the ultimate Amazon Prime, deliver it to my house. That's what I want. And so Jesus responds to her question. He's saying, if you drink from this well that I'm talking about, you'll never be thirsty again. What he's saying, whoever drinks from the water that I offer will be satisfied forever. She's taking him to be talking about literal water. She's going to see he's actually talking about something else. Again, a lot of what Jesus is doing here is echoing prophecies in the Old Testament that foretold about a Messiah that he is going to make possible. In fact, in Isaiah chapter 55, it says this, it'll be on the screen. It's a prophecy about the suffering servant who we know to be Jesus. It says, come, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. And he who has no money, come, buy, and eat. Incline your ear and come to me, hear that your soul may live. In other words, what Jesus offers here cannot be bought, and it is also open to anyone, no matter your social standing, your income level, your history, whether you're a male or a female, whatever it is. In other words, another thing we see here about what Jesus offers is this. Jesus offers living water to those who can't afford it. So not even just for those who don't ask for it, but maybe you do want it. Even if you cannot afford it, he is willing to give it to you. That what he offers, it cannot be bought, it cannot be earned, it cannot be achieved by being a good enough person or promising God, hey, 2024, I'm going to do better, make better decisions than what I do now. Like, that is not what gives us this living water. It kind of makes me think of last year, my wife and I bought a house, we moved into a new house, we sold our current house, and it was like the height, it was April 22, the actual height of all the house craziness. Fortunately for us, we were selling a house, so like it able to make it possible. But long story short, the house that we got into, like, we shouldn't have gotten. Like, there are so many things that had to happen for us to get this house. We put so many offers on houses, whatever. One of the reasons we got it is because the listing agent who was selling the house didn't do their job. So long story short, there was a couple at the time who came to New City. They've since moved. It was an older couple. And we actually really wanted to be in the neighborhood that we ended up buying. And they would go on walks around the neighborhood. And every time a house came on the market, they would text us a picture, like the for sale sign, in the neighborhood. And I didn't say anything to them because it's like, I'm just trying to be nice. But I was like, we don't actually need these texts. Like, we've got the notifications. Like, we're checking Zillow every day. We've got a real estate agent. Like, we don't need. But I was like, oh, great, thanks. And so one day they sent us another one. And I was like, hey, thanks so much. And I immediately go on Zillow, and it wasn't there. I search online. I couldn't find it. Now, I'm probably going to butcher it because I'm not a realtor, but our agent told us basically the lady who listed the house listed it wrong, the way you were supposed to do it, I don't know, at some point in the past. And the only way to know is actually for sale. It's like if you went to the MLS website and you specifically typed in that address. So like we put an offer on the house. They said the highest and best by Saturday. This was the time where you get one offer, one chance only. The listing agent didn't fix the house until Friday night. So less than 24 hours before bids were supposed to be in. Now, I share that because the only reason we got that house is because the listing agent didn't do their job. Like we would not have got it. We would have been outbid for sure. But because somebody didn't do their job, we got something that honestly we could not have afforded. And for us, as we read this story, we just need to realize that Jesus came because we couldn't do our job. We could not live up to the perfect standard of God, and yet he loved us so much that he came for us. Now, you might be saying, how do we know that this woman can't, quote unquote, afford it? How do we know that she actually isn't a good enough person? How do we know that she needs Jesus to do something for her that she could not afford or achieve or do on her own? Well, if you see her story, you quickly find out why. We continue to read. It says this in verse 15 again. Sir, this woman said to him, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and come here to draw water. Then Jesus responds, go call your husband. He told her, and come back here. Now, this is just a helpful side note. Historically or contextually, if you're going to talk about religious matters to a woman in the ancient world, you would actually want to talk to the husband and the wife because so many things in the ancient world went through the man of the household, and certainly including things like religion and like legal matters. And so what he's doing is actually a culturally appropriate thing. It's not that he doesn't just want to talk to her, but he's kind of respecting how people did things in this culture. So he tells her, let me tell you about this. Go get your husband, come back. Let me explain to you what I'm talking about. Verse 17, I don't have a husband, she answered. You have correctly said, I don't have a husband, Jesus said. 18, for you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true. Sir, the woman replied, I see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain. So this is Samaria became the capital of the northern kingdom. So they would often worship in this mountain top at Samaria. Our ancestors worship on this mountain, but you Jews say that the place to worship is in Jerusalem. She's referring to the temple in Jerusalem. Now, what we see happening here is that she, just like if you were with us last week, we read about Nicodemus in chapter 3, when Jesus was talking about being born again, and he's confused, like how do you be born again from your mom if you've already been born once? She's also taking Jesus' comments literally, and she's not fully understanding what Jesus is talking about. And so again, Jesus says, hey, go get your husband, come back here, and I will explain these things to her. But she doesn't have one. In fact, she's had 5, and the one she's currently living with is not her husband. So she's not in a good situation. Now, again, I just want to say this. In the ancient world, the condition that this woman is probably literally just survival mode. Her previous husbands, again, she could not have asked for a divorce. So the reason she's been married 5 times is either her husbands have died or they have divorced her, or a combination of the two. And in the ancient world, as a widowed woman, especially if you don't have a father or a brother, to survive, you really can't survive unless you have some sort of male relative from which you can live with and do legal matters with and pay for things. It's just how the society was structured. So the fact that she has had 5 husbands and now is with another man, it could be a mix of poor decisions, or it could have literally been she was just trying to survive. So that she did not have to live out on the streets. And here's the thing, whether or not all her divorces, let's say, were justified, like maybe all of her husbands died, and it wasn't her fault at all. It still would make her look like an outcast, the fact that she had 5 husbands, even if it was not of anything of her own doing. So she looks like a moral outcast. And so she sees, however, something's different about this man. Like, he knows these things that I haven't told him. And so she calls him a prophet. And then Jesus goes on to explain to her that there's a time coming when true worshipers of God won't have to go to wells like this one in Samaria or to temples like the one in Jerusalem, but you can worship God wherever you are. He said there's a time coming where anybody can worship Jesus or worship God anywhere. And then he says this in verse 25. If you look down, verse 25, the woman said to him, I know that the Messiah is coming, who is called the Christ. That means the anointed one. So she's like, I know there's going to be a time when that happens. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. Verse 26, Jesus told her, I, the one speaking to you, am he. Now, how much the Samaritan woman understands who Jesus is or what he's actually saying is debatable here, but she does mention that she's familiar with this idea of a Messiah and that when he comes, he's going to explain what all these things mean and this water stuff that he's talking about. And of course, Jesus answers her plainly here. He says, the Messiah that you've heard about, it's actually me. Like I'm here to explain to you and to everyone who God is, why I've come, and what it means for you. So they have this conversation. The disciples then arrive. They've arrived back, and they cannot believe that Jesus is having a conversation with a Samaritan woman. Right? Again, to the disciples, they're like, why are you talking to those people who don't honor you and do evil things? Why would you talk to her? So they're upset with Jesus, but meanwhile, the woman goes back into town, and she's super excited. She's telling everybody that this man, it says in verse 29, has said everything I've ever known. Again, the conversation we have was likely longer than what we have recorded. We're just getting the highlights. She goes into town. Hey, this man has said everything that I've ever done. And she starts telling all these people about this man, Jesus, who is at the well. And could he be the actual Messiah? So she goes back. The disciples are mad. He begins to teach his disciples about the mission of what he came to do, of why he came and who he came for. And then we'll just skip down to the last part, verse 39. It then says this, after this conversation Jesus has with the disciples, verse 39. Now many Samaritans from the town believed in him, that is Jesus, because of what the woman said when she testified, he told me everything I ever did. Now, hear me. Don't miss what's happening here, that in this story, you have the outcast, you have the quote-unquote sinner, that God is the one that God uses to draw a people to himself. The one with the broken past, the one who's full of regret, the one who feels like no one loves her. You know what? She probably even feels like God doesn't even love her. After all, she's had a husband after husband. If God loved her and cared, certainly her life would have been different. And yet this is the one that God uses to change an entire town. Her testimony. Then verse 40, it says this, so when the Samaritans came to him, they asked him to stay with him, and he stayed there 2 days. Many more believed because of what he said, verse 42, and they told the woman, we no longer believe because of what you said, since we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this really is the Savior of the world. In other words, what's happening here is that some of the Samaritans, likely including like the town leaders or the town elders, they go to this well, they talk to this man, and then they are so blown away by him and how he explained things and probably the things that he knows about their own lives, that they beg him to come back and stay with them, to teach them more about these things of God. Now, again, for us, it's like, oh, that's kind of cool. In the ancient world, this is a huge deal that the Samaritans are asking a Jew. It's like a Carolina fan asking a Duke fan to come watch the game with him. Like, this is not something you would do unless you want to be enlightened. And of course, that's something that they should do. But the Samaritans are asking a Jew to come back with them and to teach their entire town who he is. And hear me, it is all because Jesus sought out a Samaritan woman who thought she was a nobody to transform an entire village. Or put another way, what does Jesus offer us? What we see happening here is that Jesus offers living water to those who don't deserve it. To those who don't deserve it. Certainly, hear me, certainly this is what the disciples would have thought. They would have thought, why are you talking to her? Why are we staying with them in their village? We're supposed to like get the water, get the food, and get out of here quickly. And yet he's going to stay for people who haven't earned it, who do not deserve it, because he loves them. Now here's what I know, okay? We all have people, or maybe types of people who we think don't deserve God's love. Even if you're a Christian here tonight and you're a follower of Jesus, there is likely somebody in your life, or maybe a type of people, who, if you're honest, you'd feel some sort of way if and when you see them in heaven. They'd be like, I mean, you, like, how did that happen? Like, there's people, like, we might think, like, hey, we know God loves everyone, but I'm not sure that you have earned it or you're quite there yet. And what we see in this story as we begin to think about this Christmas season, that this is why Jesus came into the world. Not for some cool trick, not to simply teach us how to be good people, although he certainly did that, not to simply show us what love looks like, although he certainly did that. He came to redeem and to reconcile a people to himself. That's why he came. And so last thing I just want to mention here, that in John chapter 2, Jesus performs his first miracle. He's turning water into wine. And what that demonstrated is that he came to give new wine or to new life to those who need it. That what he offers that you can get nowhere else. And then you get this powerful contrast. In John chapter 3, you get this powerful contrast for the first two people in John's gospel that Jesus comes and reveals himself to. In John chapter 3, Jesus talks to a religious leader named Nicodemus. Nicodemus was studious, he was powerful, he was respected, he was orthodox in his beliefs. In other words, he believed the right things about God, he was theologically trained. And then in John chapter 4, you get a woman who was unschooled, who had no social influence whatsoever. She was despised even by her own people in her own town. She was not orthodox in all her beliefs. Nicodemus, again, was a man. He was a Jew. He was a ruler. He had authority where he lived. He or she is a woman. She's a Samaritan, and she is a moral outcast. And look right at me. They both needed Jesus. They both needed Jesus. This is why Jesus came, that no matter how great you think you are or how terrible you think you might are, we all come to Jesus in the same manner. We need him to offer us something that we could not earn or achieve on our own. As I close, I want to say this again. What does Jesus offer? So we've talked about this woman at the well, and we know this story is not just about her. It was given to us. Ultimately, what we see happening here is that Jesus offers living water to you, not just to the Samaritan, not just to the religious leader, not to the person who knows everything about the Bible or the person who knows a little bit about the Bible, even the people who know nothing. Like you literally could walk in here like, I never even read the Bible in my life. This is who he came for. And so here we can appreciate the lights or the family or the season or the gifts, and we can enjoy even a Christmas service like this as well. But if we miss the point of why Jesus came, you have literally missed Christmas. It wasn't to make us feel better or to sing a bunch of songs. It was so that you and I can be reconciled to God. Even if you didn't ask for it, even if you cannot afford it, or even if you don't deserve it. The offer is that God came in the form of a man, started as a humble baby to no-name parents in a no-name town, to show us what it means to be loved. In the midst of your sin and your darkness, not sometime in the future, not in 2024, but tonight, now. Like you can ask the Lord, you can repent and just be honest about your need for him, and he will redeem you. He'll offer life to you. He will let you come in. Jesus offers living water to you. So again, as you go, however busy your next couple of days are, or maybe you'll be more chill, would you just reflect? Why? Why did he come? Why did he invite a woman who was so opposite of who he was and of his culture? He did this to show us that no matter who you are or what you've done or what has been done to you, he has come for you. Hey, thanks so much for checking out this video. We upload new videos every week to help encourage you in your faith in Jesus. So be sure to subscribe to this channel so that you never miss a thing.